How's it going?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So you are,
Sorry to
or no, it's fine. I'm waking up. Okay, don't worry. I promise.
sorry to get you up so early.
Normally kind of a night person, but yeah. Do you want to introduce yourself for everybody?
Yeah, okay. So I'm Ina. I'm an ex-Muslim that grew up in Saudi Arabia and lived in Pakistan for a little bit. I'm at NiceMangos on Twitter, and I have a podcast called Polite Conversations, and I'm an illustrator and a blogger.
Cool. How long did you live in Pakistan for? In Saudi Arabia?
In Saudi Arabia, most of my life till I started university, and in Pakistan, on and off, like 4 or 5 years.
Gotcha. And then from there, you moved to
Canada.
Okay, cool. And you've been in Canada for the rest of your life since then, or?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I lost everything, all of my DMs on Twitter. So I'm not actually sure what was the motivating reason for you to reach out, or what happened for what we were originally
actually talking? Some other people connected us on Twitter, if I remember correctly, and they were like, "Oh, you guys should talk," and they linked to a chat where you had a chat with another ex-Muslim, and people were complaining that you let her get away with a lot of bullshit.
Yeah.
And I actually listened to that chat, and I mean, I don't blame you, because this is an easy thing for a lot of ex-Muslims to pull with people that don't know a lot about Islam, right? So you will defer to their experience, and you can't really challenge too much. But it was hard to listen to.
Yeah. I had a conversation. I brought on 2 Muslims after, I think one from Turkey and one who lived in America. Yeah, and I learned a lot more. Pretty much everything she said was wrong.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, we can go over any of that.
This is the thing, though, right? So I'm an ex-Muslim as well, and I had a lot of faith in this movement, and I thought it was a very noble goal to try and destigmatize apostasy from Islam, which is a big deal, and it isn't at all normalized. So that's a great goal to have, but they, have slowly shifted from that goal to just being like anti-left, anti-Muslim, anti-SJW, and now we're at a place where it doesn't really achieve anything.
Yeah.
And what I heard
when you talk about this movement, what in particular are you referring to? Just around the same page.
Sorry, ex-Muslim movement, and
gotcha.
Islam reformist movement, and it's kind of overlapping with alt-light and Dave Rubin's and Trump stuff, and it's just everything that the people who wanted to discredit critics of Islam said a long time ago that this would turn out to be, and it's disappointing to see that it has indeed turned out to be just an excuse for pushing right-wing agendas.
Yeah, I think when I talk about this, it's often the difference. A lot of people seem to think I'm hypocritical with the way that I approach these issues. It's the difference between I'm very anti-religious, so I would say that I hate Islam and I hate Christianity, but I don't hate Muslims or Christians. A lot of people have a hard time distinguishing between those two things, I think.
Yes, and it's also the power balances, right? You've got to be a bit more careful in how you criticize Islam in an environment, a political environment that's very, very anti-Muslim, I think. And probably you're more comfortable criticizing Christianity in an environment that isn't really anti-Christian.
Yeah.
So but
you've already lost half the people in the conversation when you get to that point. Because these are the same people that'll go, I don't understand why I can't say fuck black people if some people could say fuck white people. It should all be the same.
Right. It's not the same, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is my problem with a lot of ex-Muslims, especially ones with ex-extremist backgrounds. They seem to view everything through the lens of their extremist upbringing, right? So they kind of project that onto every single Muslim.
Yeah.
You know how she said stuff like, Muslims lie a lot. They're
oh, God, yeah.
and at the same time denouncing this sort of conspiratorial taqiyya concept. Like, I don't know how much you know about the dog whistles of the anti-Muslim community, but taqiyya is definitely one of those things.
Yeah. And as soon as somebody tells me that an entire group of people has an excuse to lie, they've already set themselves up where they can never be wrong about anything. So, and I've actually ran into people that have done that in the past, where I'll point out, like, okay, well, Christians do this thing and Muslims do this thing, and they're like, okay, whoa, but it's way different when Muslims do it, because Muslims can lie about everything and it's religiously justified. And it's like, okay, well, that's really convenient for your argument, isn't it? Because now you can never be wrong about anything you're saying.
Right. And also, like, Muslims are not robots, right? They lie. Of course they lie. Like, everybody else lies. Every theist lies. They don't need a religious justification to be able to lie. Mm-hmm. Taqiyya is this, like, obscure concept that I actually, growing up in Saudi Arabia, never heard of.
Sure. Until
I came to North America and, interacted with anti-Muslims who were accusing me of it.
Yeah. I had a conversation with a lady once who was trying to tell me it had to do with like the Women's March, and for some reason Breitbart thinks that, like, the Women's March leader was that one ex-Muslim woman,
Linda Sarsour.
Yeah.
She's not ex-Muslim. She's very Muslim.
She is Muslim. Okay, gotcha. And there was a claim that she supports female genital mutilation, I think. And I wasn't too familiar with her, but I dug around just very briefly, and it didn't look like she did. All of the comments that I'd seen her make were anti-female genital mutilation. And I brought this up to her, and I was like, okay, well, you said that she's very pro-female genital mutilation. I can't find any information about this. She seems to be on the opposite side. And that was the first time I heard of taqiyya, where she was like, oh, well, you see, what she's actually doing is she's going to build a big following, and she's lying right now, and then she'll reveal the truth later. And I'm like, don't you think this sounds a little bit, like, fucking ridiculous? Like, I mean, like, you're lying to build a following, and then you're going to 180 your position later on, and do you expect that people will still follow you? Like, I don't know. Yeah, it just seems really dumb.
I mean, I'm no fan of Linda Sarsour, and I think there's plenty of legitimate criticisms of her, and she has said some nasty stuff, like,
I saw some of her Twitter spats.
Yeah, about, like, I don't know, removing Ayaan Hirsi Ali's vagina or something like that.
Yeah.
So she's not exactly the progressive that she portrays herself to be, and I see her sort of as very much the flip of Dave Rubin, right? So he pretends to be this liberal, the last liberal, and he sort of normalizes and platforms and legitimizes these shady people like Mike Cernovich and Paul Joseph Watson, and, he says there's a necessary place for InfoWars and Milo and just disgusting stuff. So on the other end, Linda Sarsour also legitimizes a bunch of far-right, really gross imams with horrendous views. And at the same time, she's pretending to be this progressive woman, right? So she isn't, she isn't the progressive that she claims to be. And there's plenty of legit criticism, but then there's a racist jump on that anti-Linda Sarsour bandwagon and, try to apply these weird anti-Muslim conspiracies to her, right?
Yeah.
So a bunch of things are correct at the same time. Like, yes, there's a bunch of racist criticism of her, but yes, also there's a bunch of legitimate criticism of her.
Yeah. The frustrating thing is that this is actually kind of like a minority phenomenon in general, ironically enough, is that, for example, if I do something really stupid, I don't know if this is because I'm not a minority figure, but if I do something stupid, it reflects poorly on me as Stephen Bonnell. As an individual, I do something dumb, it reflects poorly on me. But if a Muslim does something dumb, or like a minority figure does something dumb, it is reflective of the entire group of people. That's kind of related to her. So like if Linda says something stupid or does something stupid, it's not just her being stupid. It's a reflection of all Muslims have a propensity to lie to further an agenda or something, which is another really annoying thing to deal with. I run into this a lot when people talk about there's a huge double standard. I'm curious if you agree with this or not. There's a huge double standard in terms of what's considered in the name of Islam versus in the name of Christianity. So for instance, if anybody ever makes any sort of vague reference whatsoever to something related to Islam, it seems like people are very quick to label that as like Islam extremism or Islam terrorism. Whereas if somebody makes a reference to God or Christianity, people are like, well, that's just an expression. They don't actually mean that. So as an example of this, if any leader in another country was going to war and they said something along the lines of like, I consulted Allah and he told me to do this, I think people would be very quick to say, okay, well, this guy is a fucking Islam extremist. Like it's a holy war. Whereas in the United States, when George Bush says, well, I talked to God and he told me to do this, or when Trump says the Bible is the most important book in the world, like nobody ever looks at that as like, oh, well, that's kind of Christian extremism. It's just like, well, he's just saying that,
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but also that's probably because of the perception of Christianity being watered down to an extent, and Islam commanding an orthodoxy that is still pretty concerning, right? So I think that's where that double standard comes in. People just don't view them as equally dangerous, perhaps, and rightfully so in some ways.
Sure. Was there like a specific thing you wanted to talk about, or do you want to just kind of move around different religious topics, or?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about whatever your views on this. I think we agree on a lot of stuff, and I found myself agreeing with a lot of the positions that you were taking with the person that was on your show before. Sure. How you were challenging her. But of course I was like, I wish you had said this, but you obviously don't know.
I didn't know anything about like when because it seemed like unless I'm losing some sort of nuance, it seems like she said some things that were wrong to the core. Like when she talked about how there was a singular interpretation of Islam.
That's so silly, yes.
and then that was part of the thing that both of the Muslims that I brought on later grilled me on about the existence of hadiths and how, and I should have known this to some extent because I know that there are different Islamic groups in the Middle East, right? The Shias, the Ayatollah, the Sunnis, like they have to have some sort of different beliefs. But yeah, I just didn't have. It's really.
And even
stupid.
Without the sects, right? You would not have Islam apologetics if there weren't different interpretations. It's so frustrating to deal with apologists of different scriptures, right? So I had a show with a woman who considers herself a feminist, and we discussed the Quran verse 434 about wife beating. And, it says pretty clearly that, first you should give her a chance, then forsake her in bed, and then strike her if she's still disobedient.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, how do you justify that? And, she went into so much weird stuff saying that, well, I don't even know. I can't put myself in the position of justifying that. But she wasn't actually, taking the literal sense and saying, yes, it says it's okay to beat women. There's always a denial involved and always some sort of like mental gymnastics in saying that it doesn't actually say what it says clearly.
Yeah. So
that means it's a different interpretation, right? This is how they're interpreting it to justify it to themselves. So when I talk about, the verses that talk about commanding killing of apostates and slavery to, my family, which is very, very, very progressive and liberal and secular, they will, of course, not discredit the whole book by hearing these verses. Firstly, a lot of them don't even know that these verses exist. I learned a lot about the Quran after leaving the religion.
Yeah. Which isn't surprising to me. I'm glad that I have. I was raised Catholic, very Catholic. I went to a Jesuit high school, Catholic grade school, and I'm extrapolating a little bit, but I'm willing to bet that a lot of religions play out similarly, and that no two people generally worship in the same way. Like churches in different cities are going to be very different, and different regions are going to be incredibly different, and even in the same city, two different churches can be quite different from one another. And this idea that Christianity is the worshiping in any, even from one Catholic to another, is going to be so radically different, that the idea that every single Muslim is like this, has robotically memorized the Quran and can recite every single verse and has the same understanding as every other, it is insane to me. And I kind of figured, just by virtue of common sense, I think there are around 3 million Muslims in the United States, and I haven't heard of any apostasy killings or anything going on. Like, I figured that people probably have their own mental gymnastic justifications for fucked up shit in the Quran, the same way that Christians do for fucked up shit in the Old Testament,
So the way I've heard it justified a lot of times is, no, that's not written for this time. It was for a time where people were at war and things like that. Now, of course, an extremist will take it in the way that, the West is still at war with Islam, so we can justify it. Or whoever criticizes Islam is at war with Islam, so we'll justify killing this person. But the people who are peaceful will be like, no, that's not what it says at all. And it was written for a whole different time.
Yeah, the values were different. They're relative. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, for me, that would just discredit that this religion stands the test of time, and I'd stop believing. But some people, don't, and would rather make excuses. To say that there's only one single interpretation is silly, and to deny Islam apologetics altogether.
Yeah. I find oftentimes that people, when I think one of the most frustrating pieces of rhetoric for me, and you might be more familiar with this because I don't engage at all with imams or like the leading Islamist critique or whatever. So I'm not even sure what it is insofar as like leading figures go. I hear this claim repeated often that seems really stupid to me, that Islam needs to go through a reform like Christianity did. Every time people say that, I'm not really sure what they mean. Because when you look at the Christian Reformation, this was hundreds of years ago.
Was bloody and
Christianity's come a long way in the past 200 years, and there wasn't a major reform, unless I missed a big Vatican meeting or something.
See, I think people mean it differently. They want it to be watered down and defanged, how Christianity was, right?
Sure.
Which is happening.
But it seems like people seem to not understand that, for Christianity, this didn't involve a major reworking of the Bible, or there wasn't a big denouncement of Christian beliefs. All the shitty stuff in the Old Testament is still there. Technically, sex before marriage is still a sin in every version of Christianity that I am aware of. We just kind of don't really pay attention to those parts as much anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's what people want when they say reform. And then it pisses me off when people say that it's not possible when it's happened. There are gay Muslims. Somehow they justify both things to themselves, being gay and also being part of a religion that is very anti-gay. I don't know how, and it doesn't make sense to me. But I've interviewed people on my show.
Catholics do similar things. I remember the saying that we used to learn growing up was "hate the sin, not the sinner," would be how they would say it. Yeah.
But if you want to actually water down the faith, then you have to empower voices like that rather than shit on and pick on people like that by saying, "Oh, you're not a true Muslim. You're not following the religion. Well, fuck you." So I find every time I have a nice progressive Muslim on, I get a lot of hate mail directed towards that person, saying they don't really represent Islam. Well, why are you leaving it up to the extremists to represent it? If you want to actually water it down, if you want to weaken it, then you have to, I think, prop up voices that are not obeying it literally.
Yeah.
There's gay-friendly mosques now. That would have been unheard of. And it's still very, very rare, don't get me wrong. Of course, there's so much work to be done in terms of LGBT tolerance in the Muslim world, but there is change happening. To not recognize it, I think, is unjust. Yeah. And I think you did a good job at bringing up that poll where I think Muslims were more tolerant of homosexuality than evangelists in the States. So, yeah, sometimes I don't understand what the movement, the ex-Muslim movement, wants, because they seem to be doing very counterproductive things. Now, there's another meme going around that Islam is worse than Nazism, or someone wants to talk about the alt-right. It's like, oh, you think the alt-right is bad? Well, Islam is worse. It's like you can't have any other fucking conversation.
Yeah, and everything is so one-dimensional. Like, I don't know, again, you're just going back to my own religious background. Like, I wouldn't even stereotype Catholics. Like, growing up, there was a huge difference in how Catholics approached homosexuality, where some Catholic parishes in my little city are very welcoming of homosexuality. When I say that, I mean, like, if you're gay, they're not going to kick you out, whereas other more extremist versions are quite anti-homosexuality. And these are the same type of... this is like the same denomination of Christianity even. We'll have differences in my city. But when I talk to people about Islam, especially the people that are anti-Islam, oftentimes view it as this monolith where every single Muslim has like the same opinion. It's so frustrating to deal with that. It's very difficult. Yeah, I'm not sure, because as soon as a conversation starts off that way, I have like a really hard time like engaging with a person about any idea at all.
It's very frustrating, especially for me, because I actually want to see progress made on this conversation around Islam, and I do think that the left sometimes makes big mistakes in the things that they defend, or of course that's exaggerated by the right, but there is definitely improvements that could be made. And as long as these people keep singling Islam out, singling Muslims out, generalizing them, we'll be stuck in this cycle of the left being over defensive and the right being unfairly attacking, unfairly generalizing. And then nobody hears the voices of the minorities within the minorities. So, so when I see like ex-extremist, ex-Muslims, I try to take what they say with a grain of salt, because usually a lot of that is colored with their own experiences, which are horrendous, and I'm so sorry they had to go through that. But those are extremist experiences. This is not how everybody is raised. This is not how everybody is radicalized. Or, I have grown up in Saudi Arabia, and I've seen quite a wide cross section and a big spectrum of believers. Even though I grew up in a compound which was westernized, and I wasn't exposed to the morality police 24/7, I still did have to leave the compound every single day, so I had to put on the black cloak. I saw, my mom getting her ankle hit for her headscarf slipping. And at the same time, I saw my parents, who were very liberal and secular Muslims. My dad would complain about the, over conservative Muslims. He was a great role model for me growing up. And he always criticized the headscarf and these female modesty requirements. And they're all Muslims, though.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, yeah.
People don't see that. And even in Saudi, how people think that there's, only one way for gay people to be treated. If you're caught, holding hands with a man, you're going to be thrown off a building or have your head chopped off. Well, no, not really, because Saudi culture is so gender segregated that you often see men holding hands. It's pretty much part of the norm. Men holding hands on the streets. That's not really considered gay behavior.
Sure.
It might be surprising to a Westerner, and then there's also a very thriving, like, gay nightlife, like underground, obviously, and probably less so for women, but for men, there's a lot of parties and stuff that go on underground.
Yeah, this is something that I hear that is kind of funny. I think that most people have this idea that Saudi Arabia is inhabited by very extremist Muslims that practice, very rigidly. But every time I talk to somebody that has either lived in the region or lived in another one of the Gulf states, it seems like there are a lot of Saudi people that will leave the country and party, like very hard, and that a lot of the people are pretty hypocritical in terms of like maintaining their steadfastness to their rigid Islam and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, not everybody wants life to be like that. That's just how it is. And under that veil, there's a lot of people, buying booze, selling booze, drinking booze, going to parties, dressing. There was all these jokes about the clothes that women would wear under their abayas, right? Because you go into the stores, and they sell like the tiniest little outfits there. And, you'd be like, well, where are you allowed to wear this? You ask the guy selling the clothes, and he'd just chuckle like, ha, 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 I don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
And even the lingerie stores in Saudi Arabia, 'cause women weren't allowed to work. That's improved a lot now from when I was a kid. Everyone in the lingerie stores was like a dirty old man. And you'd have to buy your underwear from them. And it was a very awkward experience. And they would have the kinkiest lingerie in the windows, like crotchless, and I'd be like, wow, it's so bizarre. You're wearing a burqa while buying this shit, but,
Yeah. Or I assume, I don't know this firsthand, but.
Yeah. But there's a lot of nuances to life in Saudi and, of course, foreigners. I'm a Pakistani background person that grew up in Saudi, so I'm a foreigner. So I think I did definitely have it better than Saudi women because they don't get to live in compounds or have that escape from morality police. But here, then you see a lot of the people who want to discredit my voice as an ex-Muslim because I'm not sufficiently, anti-Muslim enough. They go on about how I'm probably not a real ex-Muslim. I was not oppressed enough in Saudi Arabia. That's why I don't hate it enough.
Sure.
Or, I hate it, but I don't want to generalize enough, perhaps. And, there were rumors about me being maybe Norwegian or, never having lived in Saudi, never having practiced Islam, which is all such garbage. But they only want one sort of narrative. And if you don't conform to that, then you're just not a legitimate voice.
Yeah. Do you ever find it interesting that it seems like some of the extremist traditional conservatives seem like they align more with kind of the extremist Islam beliefs than they care to let on? Have you ever noticed this before?
Oh my God, yes. And I'm so exhausted of this sort of trend in movement atheism. Like, I don't know how much I follow it, but Michael Shermer sort of joining hands with Dennis Prager and now Jordan fucking Peterson.
You're talking about like the kind of like Christian atheism?
Yeah. What the fuck? It's like, I did not leave Saudi Arabia and that bullshit behind to come and leave religion and find an atheist movement and be so happy and then find that we're all headed towards the same fucking garbage beliefs all over again.
Yeah. It's very strange. Yeah. You have people that are very much atheist, but we're heading towards like a Christian traditional atheist. Yeah, it's very, very, very strange. Yeah, it's like people like Peterson have found a way. I haven't watched enough Peterson to know if he is strictly religious, if he's very religious, but at the very least,
he's very evasive. He's not going to give you a straight answer.
But he found a way to extract all of the traditional values from Christianity and then kind of repackage it and present it in this like kind of like bioevolutionary way to make it sound like it's what ought to naturally exist in the world. Yeah, it's very, very, very strange to me that people have found ways to take all of the old oppressive gender roles from Christianity and then repackage that and make it like atheist like friendly or something. Yeah, I don't know. It's very weird to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just this morning I saw a video clip from a Vice interview with him where he's talking about maybe makeup should be like maybe women shouldn't wear makeup in the workplace, and the guy's like, why? He's like, because makeup is sexually provocative.
Oh, maybe. Oof, I have a whole thing on Jordan Peterson. I just went over this yesterday. There's I'm familiar. I think I watched probably the same clips that you did. If it was like a minute and a half long. Yeah, but I'm aware of what you were talking about. One of the this is kind of a thing that I do in my stream that a lot of people aren't really happy with me for, which is fine. But it's something that I feel is very important. One of the issues that I have when it comes to people like Peterson is I feel like Peterson speaks to realities that definitely exist. And the problem with Peterson is a lot of the is a lot of the philosophical normative claims that he makes is what people should be fighting against. But people try very hard to just discredit everything he says without engaging in any of the material, and I feel like that's actually really damaging. Channel 4 interview that he had with the one lady, I thought was disastrous. I thought that Peterson handled himself really well, and the woman wasn't equipped.
He did.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Yeah, I just don't think that it was as disastrous as people made it out to be. I mean, I think she was definitely ill-prepared and under-equipped and did not know enough of his views to sort of challenge him properly. And she was not familiar with the sophistry and, his sort of dodgy semantics games. So, yeah, she didn't do good. And she did that. She handed that whole free speech gift over to the Peterson trolls.
Well, like, how can you, this angers me actually so much, because how can you not have a basic defense of that idea when you bring it up, right? Like, well, what was it? She said something about like freedom of speech, right to offend, and Peterson brought up a very standard counterposition to that, and she was totally lost. Like that was very angersome to me.
But it shows how out of touch I think mainstream journalists are with the new right and their tactics. That's why you get like these, New York Times articles about the Nazi next door with, a cherry pie tattoo and wedding registry and hopes and dreams just like anybody else. Like, it's like, come on. The new right is very slick.
Yes.
You need to get up to date.
Yeah, a lot of people. I can't tell you how many people. The fights that I usually pick the most. To be honest, as dumb as it sounds, I actually like the rise in white ethno nationalism and shit because it's easier for me to deal with. Here's an example, okay? If you want to argue immigration with me and you don't like brown people, I will gladly have that conversation. What I don't want to do is have a 2-hour conversation where you present bullshit argument after bullshit argument.
But that's
easily
what
not.
Do. They're not going to openly.
But now
level will.
Yeah, well now, it seems like now there are people that will come on and just say, "I don't like brown people." And it's like, okay, well let's have that conversation.
Will, but not the ones that try to maintain this veneer of credibility and respectability, like Peterson, for example.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of those. And they are the ones with the big platforms, and they're the ones that will dog whistle to their fans, who will admit they don't like brown people, but they themselves will.
Do you get the feeling that Peterson is actually racist? Do you think that's true?
I'm not sure. He's definitely sexist and a misogynist. I don't know enough of his views on race. What I know is that he's fine allying with neo-Nazis, even ones who advocate violence against people, who won't leave their fantasy ethno-state. He's fine chilling with them, having pleasant conversations with them as long as he gets to bash the left.
Wait, so I know that like Ruben will do stuff like this. Has Peterson brought on like people that are like Spencer-esque type people to chat with?
Yes, Peterson went on Tara McCarthy's podcast.
Oh God, I didn't know this.
Yeah, and she is like an open.
I have firsthand experience dealing with her. Yeah, she's a disgusting person.
Yeah, he and then he's so hypocritical. He had a free speech event where he was fine deplatforming Faith Goldie of Rebel Media, who is now also an open ethno-nationalist, so he was fine uninviting her from their free speech event because she became too much of a liability. I think after Charlottesville, she went on a Daily Stormer Associated podcast, and Peterson, after viewing the recording of that, did not find that she question the person sufficiently on his terrible beliefs. Except he's done the same damn shit. So performative, he's fine to, get rid of Faith Goldie because she was associating with the Nazis and didn't question them enough. But he did the same.
Gotcha. Sure. I would have to look into that more. I'm not entirely familiar with this. I don't have as much of a history. Usually most of the clips I see of Peterson are really dumb things that he says that I consider to be pretty dumb. But I do have a big problem with the way that people engage him. I think that oftentimes they don't give enough credit to some of the truth that he speaks to.
I don't know if I agree.
Yeah, so here's my issue with Peterson, and I think when you watch the Channel 4 interview, I think that he does this really well. I think what happens is Peterson will make observations of fact. So, for instance, we can speak to certain personality traits that women have and certain personality traits that men have that are observationally, empirically true. But what happens is, instead of asking the question, so the proper question to ask is why do men have these views and why do women have these views? But instead it becomes trying to deny like this empirical reality that people know exists.
No, but he also suggests stuff because of that, right? So he says that women will be happier at home having babies, and they're not happy running companies. And he has horrible lectures deterring women from wanting powerful jobs. So
well, but isn't his clinical history based around trying to empower women? Isn't that one of the things that he does in his self-help things?
The thing is, he's so contradictory. So I don't know, maybe, but I can't imagine having Peterson try to empower you as a woman, someone who has a very obvious anti-woman agenda. I don't know what kind of, that's like going to a Salafi preacher for marital advice. He's always going to side with your husband. I guess that like if I hear somebody like Peterson say something like women were this is just in terms of empirical data that I'm fairly sure is true. Things like women were happier just being moms or whatever, right? This is something that it seems to be borne out in the data in terms of like the general happiness of women compared to now compared to before. But it seems like instead of trying to combat that and to try to say that like, well, this is wrong for these reasons or whatever, like the argument should rather be that like happiness isn't the only metric by which we measure the success of a person, that if you enslave a person and they're happier, that's not better than them being free and not quite as happy, that these are our arguments that are better to Sure,
make.
but you know how he talks about multivariant stuff? There's also many variables for why maybe women are not as happy in certain positions, right?
Yeah.
So he's not very consistent. And I understand what you're saying, that people get too worked up too quickly, but he is signaling a lot of really backwards things at the same time, while seemingly pointing to very benign, meh kind of stuff. There's a whole misogynistic layer to him.
For sure. And I agree with that. I just wish that people would spend more time dealing with the merits, because I think some of his arguments do have merit. I just wish people would deal with those rather than kind of...
I don't know. Do you think people need to spend time dealing with the merits of Richard Spencer's arguments?
Yeah, this is kind of my thing online. This is why a lot of people that kind of fall more to the left have big problems with me. But yeah,
you think so?
Yeah, I really do. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess so.
Well, fair enough. At least you're consistent, right?
Yeah. So like when I do these conversations, I always call this the 40-40-20 thing, where if I have a conversation with somebody, 40% of the people are going to be my diehard fans and they'll never disagree with anything I say. 40% will be rooted in the other position and they'll think I'm an idiot. But there's this like 20% in the middle that are kind of on the fence, and those are the people that I typically draw from, that I get emails saying like, hey, I was kind of going down this route and thank you for this and blah, blah. These are usually the people that I gun for. If you want to have a no engagement policy, I think that's bad. But if you want to have a no engagement policy, that's okay. But if you're going to engage with the person, I think it has to be more than just saying your ideas are wrong and dumb and bad.
Yeah. I agree with you there. And I also disagree with a no engagement policy, because I think that if you leave these assholes unchallenged, then they win. So,
and that's kind of what I feel like, and I point to this a lot, that's what I feel like happened in 2017 or 2016, is that we basically, in the United States at least, I'm not sure how familiar you are with U.S. politics. I imagine somewhat familiar. It seems like everybody is, right?
Where's that country again?
Yeah. So in 2016, we had a view of what the typical American was like in terms of like what they would tolerate. And somebody like Trump, that's an easy no. Like there's no possible way that America would ever vote for.
People got complacent.
Yeah. And more so rather than complacent, it was just that there are certain views that you can't really talk about publicly, because you'll be demonized in the workplace, you'll be demonized in the media. All of Hollywood is more or less left-leaning. Most job training and upper-level people are left-leaning in terms of messaging. So we kind of tricked ourselves, we bullshitted ourselves into believing that these people just didn't exist anymore. Or they did, but they're like maybe a few crazy rednecks in Alabama or Georgia. Yeah. But then the election rolls around and it's like, holy fuck, half the country voted for a guy that said that, Mexicans are sending rapists over the border to come and kill us all. Like, what the fuck? Yeah. Like, this is crazy. Yeah. So this is why I'm a big proponent now of like, if you're going to, I do believe like in responsible platforming. I'm not saying that, Jesus Christ, don't get me wrong, I fucking hate people like Dave Rubin. I hate Dave Rubin. I hate
you.
Dave Rubin with a fiery fucking passion. That dude is one of the, something that I was saying
Cheers
earlier is
to
that my
that.
fights are more often with people that call themselves centrist than people on the right. And I appreciate people on the right who are the extremist rights who will come out and say,
We're honest.
yeah, I hate brown
Yes,
people.
yes.
I would rather deal with somebody like that
Same.
than somebody like Lauren Southern who will
Yes,
dog whistle Western values until she fucking dies. And it's like, you're talking about white people. Yeah.
Agreed.
Another
I think we're on
example,
the same page there.
another example of this like really poor ability to deal with things is the black gentleman on this might have been another Channel 4 interview. The black journalist guy that interviewed Richard Spencer. I don't remember his name. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Maybe, yeah. I think, yeah. But
Yeah.
then he got really angry. I didn't get so upset about that. I saw some people that were like, "Oh, well, he did such a bad job." I didn't.
So these are things where like
get so upset.
the problem that I have is that I think it's very hard to do this, but what I try to do is I try to step outside of the paradigm of being a left-leaning person and look at somebody in the middle. So if you're somebody, and when I say in the middle, I don't mean like they mostly agree with everything I say, but they're open to hearing ideas. And I mean somebody that's genuinely in the middle. Like maybe black people are, less than white people. Like somebody that might have an idea like this. That it's icky, but these people exist, right? When you get somebody, and it's hard, and for all the same reasons that one lady that I talked to might be extremely anti-Islam and hate Muslims for a lot of reasons. It's very easy empirically to think that black people must be lesser than white people, right? If you look at the continent of Africa versus the wonders of Europe and black people in the United States versus the great white man, like empirically you can bullshit yourself into believing a lot of crazy
if
shit.
you don't understand like a bunch of societal and environmental factors, sure. Yeah.
But this is a problem on the left, right? Is that our messaging is much more difficult than people on the right. If I point to a person who's a criminal and I want to analyze them in an intelligent way, well, let's look at environmental factors. Was there lead in the household? What type of access do they have? What type of education do they have access to? What is the parent structure? Right? It's a very complicated analysis, whereas somebody on the right will just say, well, you just need to make better decisions. And that kind of messaging is much more, tangible. Like, well, yeah, of course, I have to make good decisions.
Actually, I had David Packman on my show recently, and we talked about how the left is actually set up structurally
to lose.
Because there are so many more nuanced positions, and the right is just like, they come with these little packages where the position is so easy to grasp.
For the Channel 4 interview specifically, I remember so this is something I bring up a lot. I've kind of delved into quasi philosophy over the past year because it's very interesting to me, like forming good arguments and attacking arguments. One of the things that Spencer brought up was that black people who were enslaved a long time ago are actually better off today for it because now black people live in the United States, whereas before they would have been stuck in Africa. This is something that maybe to somebody leaning on the left instantly sounds horrible for a variety of reasons, some good, some bad. But this is something that just sounds horrible. But but there are a lot of really good challenges to this statement. But the interviewer,
so how would you challenge it? How would you counter that?
Well, so for something like this, right? I think this is kind of an easier one, right? You would never enslave somebody with the hope of a future payoff, right? The question you would pose to Spencer is, well, let's say that I could enslave 100 people and I provide them education while forcing them to work on a farm. Let's say that in 10 years I free these people and they have a greater earnings potential and their children are better off for it. Do you think that this form of enslavement was moral? Now, if Spencer answers yes to that, that's fine, but most people would say, well, no, I wouldn't let somebody enslave me for a hope of a future payoff that might be greater, right? There are easily philosophical challenges, and you could augment that even more. Say of those 100 people, 10 of them were treated very poorly, and you didn't know if you were going to be treated right. There's a million ways that you can phrase this too that would be more likely to be resembling of slavery and whatnot. And there are really good challenges to that. That's an easy thing to shut down.
So here's the thing. I think that to do that, you have to be able to distance yourself a little bit and not be emotionally hijacked by, whatever dehumanizing bullshit Spencer is throwing your way, right? But I think that you're in more of a position of privilege to be able to get that distance than, say, a black person who has all this baggage from a very painful history. And to come face to face with Spencer talking about slavery and things like that, it's a lot harder.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but this is kind of the responsibility we take on as public figures, right? Like when we bring somebody on, it has to be, you have to be ready to counter their arguments. Otherwise, you just
Sure.
platform them in a way. Because there are a lot of people. Basically, my goal would be, if I were to bring on somebody to argue with, if I think their arguments are disgusting, I don't want them to be able to walk away looking good. I want to force them to make concessions that are really bad. You know, for instance, are you familiar with?
That's always a gamble, right? You don't know how things are going to go. Sometimes creationists end up looking good in arguments.
Sure.
Because,
so I mean,
I don't know.
You do your due diligence, right? You have to try as hard as you can to make sure.
Sure, but I also think there's different tactics to try and discredit these people. One way is the way that you're suggesting, and I do think that that's a good way. And I think David Pakman's interview with Richard Spencer was excellent for that. Mm-hmm. He did such a great job. I don't know if you ever saw it, but he was not rude. He did not raise his voice. He challenged him on everything. And most importantly, you can also just challenge Spencer on the surface, and that doesn't really get to the bottom of his disgusting views. You have to extract them from his, polished little versions that he spits out.
For sure.
And so Pakman was really good at extracting that bullshit. He did not let a thing slide. But that's a very rare and unique skill, I think. Mm-hmm. I also think that sometimes just ridiculing and mocking these assholes on air is fine. It's another tactic.
To some extent, yeah. The only thing that you have to be careful of when you do that is that you'll cause people on the other end that identified with them to dig in even more, which is something that scares me sometimes. Yeah,
but they could do that even with the very good, excellent interview. Like if you legitimately made Richard Spencer look foolish, or you legitimately, with excellent arguments, make Peterson look foolish, his fans go nuts because they can't handle their profit being disgraced like that.
Sure. Yeah, I agree that both of those can be valid tactics depending on how they're used. What I totally disagree with is I don't like it when people platform these people and they're totally ill-equipped to deal with it. Yes.
Yeah. I will agree there. Yeah. I think that's a flaw in mainstream journalism today. I think YouTubers, podcasters are actually more in the trenches with this garbage, so they know better how to counter it.
Yeah. I think that the whole 2016 election cycle was a great example of that. So many people gave Trump free airtime and didn't really challenge him on anything.
Yes.
It was more
and
just
CNN.
Liberals kind of point at it and they go, ha ha ha, like Trump is so dumb, right? Not realizing that, there's actually a fuck ton of people out there that agree with Trump. You have to speak to these people. You can't just pretend they don't exist like Hillary did,
Yeah. And CNN still will air such garbage. Like I saw a segment the other day. No matter how much hate he spews at them, they're still doing softball shit for him. I don't know why.
I feel like CNN has been pretty decently anti-Trump in their coverage. You don't think so?
There are moments where you're like, they were saying that if he's mentally unfit, that could actually be an advantage because the greatest leaders in the world were mentally unstable.
I don't know if I've heard this on CNN. Really, this sounds like an editorial or something.
I took a picture of my TV screen. It was on CNN. I promise you. I can send you a link.
Gotcha. Interesting. I would have to look at that because I follow CNN coverage pretty closely, and it seems like they're pretty. I don't know. They come down on Trump pretty hard when that shooting.
Yeah, generally they do, but occasionally you'll be like, "What the fuck is this?"
Gotcha.
Or even Jake Tapper when he had Stephen Miller on, he did a good job, fine. But on Twitter, someone said something about Miller being a Nazi or something, and sure, he might not be a literal Nazi. But Jake Tapper was so upset and was like, he's Jewish, that's an insult. I'm like, Jake, you don't understand the modern alt-right then. Being Jewish does not prove being Jewish, Muslim, a person of color, a woman, gay, trans, doesn't prevent anyone from participating in this new far-right neo-Nazi bullshit. It doesn't.
For sure. I think you have to be really careful sometimes about the labeling, though, because that does seem to get.
Oh yeah, of course.
Although part of the alt-right strategy is to make that shit as confusing as possible, right?
Yes,
you're constantly second guessing yourself. I had a conversation with somebody a while ago. This isn't necessarily related, but they mentioned something about how like, oh wow, I bet you consider yourself to be like real alpha, and I'm like really familiar with. Are you familiar with like the whole red pill community?
Not that much, but yeah, enough that I understand the jargon.
Yeah, there's like a whole, and as soon as they said that, like I instantly, like my brain like switched gears, like, wait a second, what do you think I am? And we had like a 10-minute discussion, and I found out that at the end of this, like she had no idea about any of the subtext or whatever of like the word like being alpha.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I run into that a lot. And are you familiar with ContraPoints?
Oh yeah, I love her. She's been on my show like I think 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, she brings up a good point too, where the kind of the gaslighting and the messaging becomes so cryptic that you'll find yourself where somebody will tweet something and you have to read it and you're like, is this person like dog whistling racism? I can't actually tell right now. I can't. It's really confusing. Yeah.
Yes, and that's what Peterson does too. You don't know. There's always some plausible deniability there.
Maybe, yeah. Oh man, I think we have fundamentally different views of Peterson, but I might be trying too hard to be too charitable to people. I try to. I spend a lot of time trying to separate out people that I think are truly racist versus people that.
Oh, I didn't say Peterson was truly racist.
Yeah, no, not necessarily racist, but like misogynist or something too. Like, I don't know. It's a hard one for me.
Okay. Maybe just look into him a bit more, read more.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Are you familiar with like Sargon of Akkad?
Not that much, but yeah, lately I followed a bit of stuff like his "I wouldn't even rape you" disgustingness.
Oh God, yeah.
Then there was a clip that was out recently where he was using the N-word and saying that white people misbehaving or acting like N-words.
Kind of, yeah. A lot of these are like so Sargon. So these are oh god, I can't believe this. I'm going to defend Sargon a little bit. Oh my god, I never thought this day would come. Sargon is the type of person who I've had extended conversations with him, and I think he's extraordinarily stupid. But I don't think Sargon is racist, and I would defend that opinion quite well. That the recent clip that was taken from, I think he was talking to actual like white nationalists, white ethno-state people, and because they're the ones that use this terminology, I think it was more him trying to flip it on like, well, you're white people, why are you treating me like this? You guys are acting like the N-word.
But I think.
It sounds
really. You might have a high bar for racism because I think even just trying to flip it in that way is. I'm not saying he's like an outright neo-Nazi or something an open KKKer, but there's different degrees of racism. If you think you can subvert it and turn it around and use this like in that way, especially being a white person who always argues against,
anything that empowers minority figures.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't really look good.
Sure. But I think that one thing that I think is really important is I think it's important to be very precise when you talk about things. Let me be
absolutely.
Yeah. Let me be very clear here. Are you familiar? Do you know who do you know who Dr. Disrespect is?
No idea.
Okay, so Dr. Disrespect is a huge gaming guy on the website that I stream on Twitch TV.
That's
huge gaming
why
guy.
I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of figured, so he's kind of in some hot water where he is, he says things, so he does like the mock Asian accent where he'll be like, oh, ching chong blah blah, right, when he's making fun of like Chinese players in games. So this is behavior that, and because I've been here before, if you would have known me 5 years ago, you would fucking hate me. I promise you would, okay? Because I was very much a gamer bro. Very much a gamer bro. Every sense of the word, pro gamergate, like all of that.
Delightful.
Yeah, very much so. But this is this is an issue that I had growing up, or not growing up, where I would say, I don't think I could say it on Twitch anymore, but if I say F word and referring to gay people, you know what I'm talking about? Right? So this is something that was part of my common vernacular. So something that was very difficult for me was, even though I use this word a lot, I as a person never hated gay people. I was never homophobic.
Sure. Yeah. But
so,
there's also, things according to the time, right?
Yeah,
so
for
in
sure.
the 90s, for example, I think everybody used that word. And so if you find someone saying that in the 90s, I don't think it would be fair to hold them accountable as some sort of big homophobe, especially if their actions show you otherwise. It's just that, this was normal in the 90s. And I'm not saying that that's okay, but you have to judge things according to the time. And our morality has changed. And maybe homophobia was normal in the 90s. Like, I'm pretty sure when I was like a kid, like a teenager, I was homophobic, not to the extent where, I want people hurt or killed, but I'm like, yeah, that's gross.
Yeah.
but that's all I ever knew.
Sure.
So.
But all I'm saying is that, like, even though I used that word, I was never homophobic. But when people on the left would attack me for using that word, their charge against me was always, you're being homophobic. You're homophobic. And if somebody says that to me, like, I'm instantly shutting down because it's like, well, I know I'm not homophobic, so you're definitely wrong. And I noticed the same type of attacks being levied at Dr. Disrespect, where Dr. Disrespect probably doesn't hate Chinese people, probably doesn't hate any Asian people. So saying that he's a racist is such a bad way of attacking it, rather than phrasing it. And I know this sounds like really nitpicky, but rather than saying something like, hey, your behavior empowers racism, or your behavior might lead to people being racist, is such a better way of dealing with it, because just throwing that word racist at somebody is such an instantly demoralizing thing. And if they're not racist, they're not going to engage with you at all because they know that you're wrong in the way that they see racism.
But again, there's different degrees of racism, right? So suppose that you are not the open, overt kind of, I don't like brown people kind of racist, but you do have, I don't know, some inadvertent biases. I think everybody does. So, yeah, I think it's harsh to throw around the word racist but I don't know about for, like, mocking people's accents and ethnicities. Yeah. I think that's a bit racist. I do.
Yeah, it might be, but the thing is just that we build the fundamental values of a person are more important than the behavior to some extent when it comes to changing said behavior. So, for instance,
also the intent. Right?
Yeah, that's because the intent.
Take people's intent into account.
Exactly, because the intent comes from the fundamental inside values. For instance, so if I had somebody that was genuinely not racist and they made fun of the way that Asian people spoke, if I talked to this person, I was like, hey, if you do this or this or this, it can lead to people. This is somebody that could probably change their behavior. Now, if they fundamentally hate Asian people, it's going to be much more difficult or impossible to change their behavior without getting them to change that internal belief, right? So there's a much different approach.
You talk to them nicely about it and they double down. Even though they don't hate Asian people, but they're like, no, well, fuck you. You can't tell me not to do that.
I don't know. You do your best. I don't know. I've got my handbag of stories where when I try to talk people out of like certain things, I feel like the most important thing when you have conversations with those people is usually step one is to get them to acknowledge the reality of what they're doing, even if you can't get them to change their behavior. So for instance, if I'm talking to somebody that uses the F word a lot, my first thing isn't probably like, don't use the F word, it's bad. It's usually like, hey, you know that when you do this, regardless of how you feel about it, there are some people that feel really shitty when you do it. Like, and to get them to at least acknowledge that is, I think, a good first step. Yeah, but some people won't even acknowledge reality. So,
slurs can be really hurtful, right? Even if you're just doing it jokingly. Like, there are some people who, among friends, there's a kind of consent that you can, like, even if there's friends of different races, you get along so well, you can insult each other's, ethnicity or whatever.
Yeah.
So some people take that from their friend group and try to apply it randomly on other people. And when those people do not respond well to the racial slur, it's like, well, what kind of snowflake are you? I'd say that to my black friend all the time. It's like, well, that's very different. Yeah. You can't just use racial slurs. Like I've been called a sand N-word randomly by people on the internet and then criticized for saying, well, I'm just going to block you because I don't engage with people who use that kind of slur on me. But I talk to my friends like that. Well, that's different. I'm sorry. There's some sort of understanding and relationship there.
And you wouldn't use that excuse in any other setting, right? You don't go to work and be like, "Yo, what up, dude?" or whatever. Like if the vice president is like into the office or some shit, or like if you're a global or your regional manager or some shit, and you don't talk to him the same way that you do a coworker, And if you did, and he was like, "Okay, well, you're getting written up for this. This is really inappropriate." You would say, "Well, dude, I talk to my friends this way. Why can't I talk to the the VP of food and gaming the same way?" Like
exactly. So I understand what you're saying about it being a bad strategy to jump in like the more minor cases with the charge of racism.
Yeah.
And I understand what you're saying about like being precise in your language, which is why, I myself, as like the number one non-fan of Dave Rubin, have stopped people from like calling him, a white supremacist, or I'm like, no, he's not one, and he's going to use that to his advantage if you call him that. Yeah. What he is a
useful idiot. Is the term.
He's a useful idiot, but he's also like a platformer and propagandist for such types. He's a sanitizer of those people, but he isn't that.
It angers me that like and this is something that this is like a really good thing. I think that the right, the whole right, I use that very vaguely, is very politically intelligent, and I feel like the whole left is sometimes very politically stupid, and that's something that has to change.
Probably a result of being in the winning position and getting complacent for the past little while.
Maybe. I mean, Obama only had Congress for 2 years, I think, and
No, but I'm talking culture war wise.
Oh, sure. Yeah, but even that victory wasn't real. Like, that's something that we've come to realize, that there are far more people that don't share. Yeah. The right have done a really good job at repackaging themselves and making themselves more like agreeable in that, like, when you look at people like who is a racist, horrible person, if you go back, well, it's going to be a person wearing KKK clothes, it's going to be a person that is screaming at their fat redneck, but it's not. That's not true anymore. The people on the right that are pushing ethnicities are people like Richard Spencer. They're well-spoken, they're friendly, they're charming.
They're in suits.
Yeah, they wear suits. Yeah, and a lot of people like, and then you've got the whole center, dumb fuck smorgasbord of people like Dave Rubin that are totally taken in by that. I can't tell you how many bridges I've burned because I'll be so critical because somebody will say something. Are you familiar with Stefan Molyneux?
Oh, yes. Enough that I cringe instantly. Yeah.
Like, I've heard people, and there are people that I've burned bridges with that will say things like, oh, Stefan Molyneux, he can't be a bad guy. He's a father. He's a dad, Or so many people are like, well, you guys are so critical of these guys on the right. Well, I can have a friendly conversation with them. And it's like, no shit. That's the whole fucking strategy. That's the entire point of what they do.
Yeah. So as you were saying, right, precision in terms. So there's a lot of people who will use the term Nazi very loosely, right? But now we have the reverse problem of that in the skeptosphere. Yeah. So when someone is Sig Heiling, waving a swastika flag.
That's just the Roman salute. Oh my God, come on.
Yeah. And people like Peter Boghossian, I don't know if you're familiar with him, another genius skeptic, academic skeptic. He was like, we should have a moratorium on the word Nazi and reserve it only for when speaking about, I don't know, people from Nazi Germany, something. I don't remember the exact quote.
Yeah.
And so I jokingly did that quote over this horrific news story of these guys shooting at a Richard Spencer rally, Sig Heiling, I don't know, like a really obvious case of neo-Nazism, right? Yeah. And then he turns up and he's like, these are not Nazis. And then it went viral, got over 1,000 retweets, and people like it's become a joke. Mm-hmm. This is the opposite problem.
Yeah, and I mean, these people, a lot of these people are literally, talking about the Jewish question. Wait. Yeah. The centrists are the people that have to go. I would rather. I'm sorry, I don't mean that in a violent way. Not on Twitch. I wouldn't say it in a violent way here. But this is something that I say, and I've reiterated this several times during this speech, or during my talk with you. But I would rather deal with 10 Nazis than with 3 Nazis and 7 centrists that are giving them a pass on everything.
Because they'd be honest.
Because I can deal with honest people. Yeah, sure. I understand. Maybe I'm in a different position, but at least when I'm dealing with a Richard Spencer type, it's easy for me to call him out and say, this is horrible because of this reason. An ethno-state can't be implemented, right? But when there's this whole slew of people that are, not only are they centrist, they all call themselves liberals, and they're all saying, well, hold on.
But they're not even centrist, really.
Yeah, no. No, not even. And they're not skeptics either, Jesus. But when all of these people are giving a pass to everything that Spencer says, well, now my job becomes monumentally harder because I'm not just trying to speak out against the horrible shit that people on the extreme right are saying. Now I have to explain why all of these people in the center who are defending him are wrong. Yes. And that makes me look extremist. I don't want to come off as an extremist for speaking out against ethno-states.
It doesn't make you look extremist.
Well, but it does to everybody that follows a quote-unquote centrist, an enlightened skeptic centrist. Because when I criticize someone in the center now, that must mean I'm far left.
But that's because Dave Rubin, who's a far-right propagandist, is now center. So
yeah, exactly.
It doesn't mean you're far left.
Well, it's like a shifting of the Overton window, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Where I want to be able, because as fucking cringy, and I'll never say it publicly now because Jesus, I would consider myself to be a centrist kind of person, right? I'm very pro Second Amendment, but I'm also very pro social welfare. I'm very much a capitalist, but I'm very much in favor of
genuine.
Yeah, like I would consider myself to be a genuine centrist, but I'm never going to say that. But when I start attacking people on the far right, it's not enough to do that. I've got to go after every single other centrist too, which to anybody
they're upholding it. Yes.
Exactly, and so I get the appearance of being like a far left person. And if you're an actual lefty,
only to those loons.
Yeah. But
which is the entire movement.
Yeah, which is also like in my political sphere, which is like online video game streaming and YouTube. That Overton window is massively shifted because all the large voices on YouTube, the Sargon of Akkad, the Rebel Medias, the Infowars, are all extremist right people, or the people in the quote unquote center, the armored skeptics, the Chris Ragans, the Sargon. This is my frustration
with the conversation around Islam, because here I was trying to have like a reasonable conversation, criticizing actually the things that very much need to be criticized, and actually how the left sometimes does go wrong and defends the wrong stuff in terms of glorifying
Islam,
sort of modesty garments and shielding people from criticism of their blatant homophobia, things like that.
Yeah.
And then you get these people who join on with these terrible agendas, these terrible far-right agendas, like ex-Muslims now going on rebel media to talk about how Islam has no place on this planet. And it's like, no one is now going to take this conversation seriously.
It's so hard. Every time you make a statement about anything, you have to give like a million caveats. Like as like an extremist, anti-religious person, right? I'll criticize the fuck out of Islam and every part of it, regressive gender roles approach. But I have to be very careful because like if I come out and say like Islam is horrible in its treatment of LGBT people, if I just say that, I'm gonna have a million people. Yeah, fuck Islam, fuck Muslims, get them the fuck out of America, fuck these guys, Or like on one hand, I might say something like man, like Islam and female genital mutilation, this is not cool. There's a lot of problems with this. And all these people jump on like, yeah, while defending circumcision, right? Yeah, and all these people jump on and agree with you, like, fuck Islam. It's like, well, like, hold on, like, holy shit, like, this is a bad thing no matter, like, who it happens to,
Yeah, and so the people that are, like, progressive and liberal, actually, not the people who call themselves, because this Reuben thing is happening among ex-Muslims, too.
Sure.
All these people with terrible alliances with the right, are like, oh yeah, we're the liberal Muslims. No, you're not. You just want Western conservatism to replace Islamic conservatism.
Yeah,
that's bullshit.
Which are very similar in a lot of different ways. A really funny moment I had when arguing with Lauren Southern is, so Lauren Southern, every traditional conservative will slut shame until the end of the world, of course, right? So I asked Lauren Southern, I was like, okay, you made fun of, I keep saying Nicki Minaj. It's not Nicki Minaj, but there was some lady that she's a singer who she was in like a grocery store or something with her boyfriend, and some guy walked up to her boyfriend and said like, oh wow, like you're hitting that, like that's her code. And she wrote a blog post about like, wow, this made me feel like really dehumanized. Like I felt kind of like a sexual object. It was like a really bad experience. And Lauren Southern hopped on this. Oh, it might have been Ariana. Sorry, or Ariana Grande or whatever. Lauren Southern.
I'm not a big pop culture person.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you can imagine, right? Lauren Southern hopped on this and was like, okay, well, when you dress like a slut, how do you expect people to treat you, right?
Gosh.
So I asked Lauren Southern, I was like, okay, so you're in favor of women saying that women should probably cover up more to be more presentable in society, to protect men against their sexual urges. Can you tell me what is the difference between your viewpoint here and somebody saying that women should wear burqas? Because the arguments are exactly the same. And her response to me was, well, we don't kill people for not agreeing with us. And it was like, that's the only difference? That's your one difference between extremist Islam and your Christian traditional values? Like, what the fuck?
And also, not all of them kill people either.
Yeah,
There's
of course.
Plenty of people existing that aren't dead.
Yeah. Well, not only do not all of them kill people, but your point of view would probably lead to murders in the future if everybody had your extremist point of view.
Yeah,
I mean, that manifests.
Give it enough power. That's it. It's only caged right now because it doesn't have the same amount of power. That's the difference. Like, people that argue that Islam, like, the scriptures are so much more, like, exceptionally terrible than Christianity, I really don't think so from what I see opinion, really. I think it's really the level of orthodoxy that it commands over people. It's the problem. It's the level of conservatism that still exists, the level of people that take it literally. Otherwise, the scriptures are pretty vile, comparably so, in both things.
Yeah, I can only agree with you because I haven't read the Quran, so, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read the whole Bible, but from what I've read, like some of the most awful stuff is also there. You know, there was that experiment that Richard Dawkins also tweeted. It was like a video a couple of years ago now, where they, I don't know, took these really disgusting quotes from the Bible and went around and were like, oh, you know, where's this quote from? And like people thought it was like the Quran, but it wasn't.
Yeah. And it's so... God, my mom is an extremist Republican, right-leaning Christian person, and watching the gymnastics is just crazy. If you give somebody a bad quote from the Bible, they will talk a million different ways for why this was okay, why it's justifiable.
Oh yeah, same with Muslims.
But if you take any quote from the Quran, it's instantly the worst possible interpretation, and it's like just be a little rational. What is it, like 1.5 billion Muslims on the planet or something? Like if every Muslim believed this shit, like wouldn't we be like in literal fucking chaos like right now? Yeah. Like just think a little bit about this. Obviously, you know, again, there are 3 million Muslims in the United States. They must not all be fucking insanely crazy. Otherwise we would see terrorist attacks like every single day in the US.
But imagine there are people walking around thinking that they are all insanely fucking crazy and all secretly lying to earn people's trust, and then they're going to strike at some point. What a way to live.
Yeah. Yikes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think we're fairly on the same page about a lot of stuff. Maybe you're softer on Peterson than me, but
yeah, I just try to be without expression use precision of terms. I just try to be very crystal clear there. Because I don't ever want an attack that I make on somebody to be illegitimate. So, like, I try very careful to say that, like,
Peterson, you could steel man him, you could do anything, but his diehard fans will think you're attacking him.
Oh, sure. It's just for my own personal integrity.
Yeah.
I don't see much value in saying that, like Jordan Peterson is very misogynistic, as opposed to saying that Peterson has views of women that in a free society we reject because we don't use this like biological prescriptivism. We don't let these gender roles hardcore rigidly define how we live our lives, right? We don't get our morals values from what our biological inclinations are. Like
political correctness.
Well, no, it's not politically correct. It's a more precise way of attacking it, right? That I think more accurately speaks to and because then it allows you to repackage a lot of things too.
Well, what if you say he's a misogynist and then you explain all the reasons why?
Yeah, you could do that as long as you explain the reasons. You can't just call him a misogynist and read it alone.
Sure. Yeah. I've written like 3 articles on him.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
So, you know, all sourced and linked and things, and I'm still the straw manning person.
Sure.
It doesn't matter what you do.
One thing that's really important that a lot of people don't do, and I know this is really difficult, and I'm not the greatest at it either yet, it's still something that I'm learning, is that a lot of the words that we use are predicated on moral systems that other people don't share with us, which is something that's really important too. This is why I'll avoid using phrases like misogynistic or racist, because when you use those words, a lot of them are almost circular in that you have to already buy into a certain belief system, right? So like, for instance, like I could never say that if I'm talking to a Muslim, for instance, I would never say like, hey, you're really misogynistic, because these are people, as somebody that has a lot of experience with religious people, that might legitimately love women. I know a lot of Christians that legitimately love women, and then they'll give all the arguments.
Two things can be same. Like two things can happen simultaneously, right? You can love women and also beat women.
Sure,
right?
But I'm just saying that, like, in their point of view, misogyny has a definition, and when you call them misogynistic, you're it's kind of like you're taking two moral systems and you're applying.
I feel like you're playing a bit by their rules in that sense. Of course, I will be also very precise. I don't just throw that around. People will throw that around at someone who will make a sexist remark or whatever. That's not enough to qualify someone as a total misogynist in my eyes. But I think Peterson has proved himself over and over and over again, and now it's safe for me to use that word. But I also dislike how afraid people in the skeptosphere are of using the word racist, even for the most obvious racism. it's like the opposite problem of, political correctness. It's like a backwards.
Sure. The why is so important to me. As long as people are focusing on the why, that's okay. Like, it's not enough to just call somebody racist anymore. Like, the explanation has to be given.
I agree. You have to have a good thing to back you up if you're going to make that charge. So, yeah.
So there is somebody in my chat and somebody that emailed me that I don't know. I don't think this is relevant at all to the conversation, but they really, really, really want to hear you speak about MENA, Middle Eastern, and North African Christians.
Okay, that's not really my area of expertise. So,
okay, I don't know why, but they've been spamming my chat, and they sent me multiple emails asking you to talk about them. I don't know if you have like a work related to that or.
No, I mean, I understand like the struggles of minorities within minorities, and I talk about that generally all the time. It's like. That would be how I speak about, LGBT Muslims and Christians in the Middle East, Christians in Pakistan. Same sort of thing. Just like how I spoke about it, I would have the same talking points about it. So
gotcha.
I'm not sure what I can specifically add to that.
I wasn't sure if there was like, if you had commented on it and they wanted to hear you speak more about it. I don't know. They're just like, they were very adamant in me asking about it. So now I can say that I did.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up? What is like your realm? Is it typically like only blogging, or do you do YouTube stuff too? Or
I do podcasts.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's right. I saw that. I saw your SoundCloud. You had a ton of podcasts listed. That's right.
Yeah. So nowadays, my focus is mostly on the rightward shift of movement, atheism, and ex-Muslim because of how discrediting that has been on a larger scale. I think it's like, so that's what I like to talk. I don't think there's enough people talking about it. Like, for example, I don't know if you've heard about the Raif Badawi case.
No.
The Saudi blogger that was imprisoned for, writing something critical of Islam, and then he received lashes, and he's still in prison. And it's a terribly tragic story, and often hijacked by far righters.
Sure.
And his wife is now shifting further and further and further to the right, to the point where, she makes these really terrible, like, jokes about Muslims, and, endorses Laura Loomer being a great conservative hero.
She's a Project Veritas goon, right?
I'm not sure, but I do know that she has some terrible views about not getting in a cab with a Muslim-looking Uber driver, and she was angry about Muslims walking around after some attack. Look at them walking around with.
Oh, they're celebrating by just existing.
Yeah. And she's often just like retweeting Paul Joseph Watson and anti-immigrant shit, and it's like. It's so harmful. It's so harmful to her legitimacy. It's so painful to see this happen time and time again.
Wait, so Laura Loomer is the wife of that?
No. The wife is like supportive of Laura Loomer.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. The wife is Ensaf Haider.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, seeing this pattern all the time from people who are leaving extremist situations and then being prone to being hijacked by Western extremists. It's sad.
Basically becoming a reactionary is what I always tell people not to do. Don't define yourself. This is like what teenagers do, right? Where your parents tell you to do something and now you're going to do whatever is going to piss them off the most. Like, don't be a reactionary. Like, understand the merits of, or understand what's wrong with that position, and then take up a reasonable position that isn't necessarily just the opposite of that one.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not even just about pissing your parents or your culture or anyone off. If you're like demonizing Muslim immigrants, think of all the women in your position. The women that have come here and fled these horrible situations, now demonizing other women who they think should not be able to flee in the same way.
Yeah.
I don't understand. And then there's like, red pill ex-Muslims cropping up, and crossovers with MRAs and
they become like your token figures too. Yes.
Yes.
This is one of the the most difficult things for me to deal with, because you have to skirt this line very carefully, because you can't discredit somebody because of their minority status. But you have these figures. Are you familiar with Blair White?
Yeah.
So Blair White, you know Milo Yiannopoulos, I'm sure. Yeah. Maybe even that one lady that I talked to, I don't remember her name, the ex-Muslim. But you get these figures, and they are so empowering to people on the right, where you can no longer say things like, okay, well, a lot of your stuff is really transphobic. Nope, it's not transphobic. We have our own trans person, Blair White, who agrees with everything. Or like, you guys are kind of homophobic. Like, do you hate LGBT? No, of course not. We have Milo Yiannopoulos. And then they're like, well, what does Milo say? You're like, well, gay people are lazy. I wouldn't hire them. Like, oh, cool. We have our own gay guy to say every bad thing about gay people that we could possibly want. It's like, holy shit.
That's what the ex-Muslim role is now. Now, if I wanted to like triple my Patreon or my Twitter following, that is the route I would go.
Yeah.
I'm an idiot for not going that route.
I understand that feeling sometimes. And the arguments are so easy to make too. Sometimes I wonder, because I was like a carpet cleaner, like a huge, I had a lot of trouble financially in my life, and then I became a streamer. So I have like the perfect like backstory to be like an extremist rightist. Like, well, look, like I came from nothing, and now I'm a big streamer, and anybody can make the right decisions to become wealthy. If you're poor, it's just because you're being lazy and you're cheating, right? This kind of message is very powerful. You know, you could have 500,000 subs on YouTube. Like, well, he did it, so why can't everybody else? You know, but it's so absurdly reductionist of how life is, you know.
Yeah, this tokenism, it's sad, and it's taking away from progress. And it's ironic, because a lot of these people that support such tokenism are like hugely critical of, you know, the so-called regressive left. And I mean, when that term started out, it actually meant something.
I'm curious, what does that mean? Like, I don't hate black people. I don't know what that even means anymore.
Okay, so when it started out, I believe it was coined by Majid Nawaz, who is a reformer, maybe, or I'm not sure what he goes, like how he describes himself these days. I stopped paying attention a while ago, but. So it was coined, I think, to describe the faction of the left that will defend some regressive stuff, like, you know, modesty garb in Islam, in order to defend minorities, always with good intent, but they end up defending some pretty damn not progressive stuff. So in certain situations, I thought it made sense. I have been personally frustrated by a lot of leftists trying to silence me or shut me down when I try to be critical of, forced modesty, something that I have been victim to in my own life. But now it's being used to describe pretty much everyone on the left.
Yeah.
Everyone is just regressive. Meanwhile, they side with like backwards, caveman ideas, like, you know, trans people are mentally ill and gay people are lazy or whatever. That's not regressive. That's fine.
It almost sounded to me, and I wasn't familiar with the start of that. My impression was always just that, like, okay, they call themselves progressive. What can we call them to really piss them off? How about regressive? Like, LOL, you know, like.
Yeah. It does seem a bit like that now.
The ironic hijacking of, dude, I hate this shit. Oh my God. Sometimes I just want to like drop it on and go back to just playing video games. Like, when fake news started off as meaning something like very particular, and now it's just like CNN published something that was mean about Trump. That's fake news. Like, when the same people that now unironically speak about fake news are throwing like Breitbart and Daily Caller links and shit at me. It's like, Jesus Christ! Like, I just want to end myself. Like, oh God.
Yep. So this is such a great tactic, though, right? To hijack everything, to make everything ironic, and even their like symbolism, right? The OK
sign,
yeah.
Because you can't even call it out, because you're like, dude, like, what are you doing? It's like, what, dude? It's just a funny thing. Like, come on, man. Nobody's being serious. People do this shit with racial humor sometimes, and sometimes legitimately. Like, I think racial humor can be funny, but if somebody's making the same type of racist jokes over and over and over again, right? And then you're like, dude, like, do you think you might be like a little bit racist? Like, whoa, dude. It's just comedy, man. It's just funny. Louis C.K. does jokes like this. Like, okay, but like, yeah. They only want to engage in like the most surface level shit, and it's like pretending that there is no like implicit, kind of supporting of anything, or that if it's not like explicitly stated, I run into this a lot when I deal with conversations about misogyny or racism. Jesus Christ, I have a conversation with Sargon, and we talk about like women maybe are not as encouraged to work in certain areas as men are, and he's like, okay, show me the law that keeps a woman from becoming an engineer. It's like, well, come on, dude, like, what? Nothing works that way. Like, really? Or show me the law, or one of his things is show me the law that keeps black people from getting married and forming families. And it's like, no, like nothing works this way in society. Like, it's so much more complicated than this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you any other topics or anything else you want to bounce over? I don't know how.
I would just say, like, when it comes to discussion about Islam, please look out for nuanced viewpoints, and extremists just watch that they're not coloring their entire, like, they're not projecting extremism onto all Muslims, because I don't think that's helpful. There's so many legitimate criticisms to make of Islam. I don't think Muslims lie is one of those.
Yeah. Programmed to lie, yeah.
Yeah, so things like that. And, there are obviously many, many interpretations, just like in any other religion. I don't think it's like this exceptional, strange, robotic thing where people are just waiting to, fool these poor innocent Westerners, and then once they gain their trust, they're going to pounce on them. Everyone has the Quran memorized front to back. It's also funny because a lot of Muslims don't speak Arabic, right? The Quran is always read in Arabic. Prayers are in Arabic. You don't understand what's being said. And when you're taught a very curated version. Like, I had no idea some of these horrendous hadiths and shit or Quran verses existed until I left and read it all for myself. And I was like, what the fuck?
So here's actually kind of an interesting question I have for you. And just because of everything with that last lady, I kind of started to wonder a lot. How common is it? Because now I notice this with you as well, that there are women that are, or maybe people, women that are born and raised in places like Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, and then you come to the West and you sound very Western. Like, I would never know that you were, or I don't want to say you're a foreigner, but that like you came from or I guess you are a foreigner, I'm sorry, that like you came from like a foreign place and were raised there for so many years. But like, is it very common that none of you have accents because you don't go out as much and you watch a lot of Western media? Or how does that work?
Well, I'm not sure like how the other person's accent came to be, because she said she was like born in Scotland. I'm not sure. She was
born in Scotland, I think, and then spent time and also I think Pakistan and Saudi Arabia.
Pakistan, there's a very, there's various accents that you could get from Pakistan. I don't really know. I don't understand what her like background is, so I'm not sure what happened with her accent. But my accent is actually very typical of someone who grew up in a specific kind of compound in Saudi Arabia. So there's like different bubbles of existence, right?
Yeah.
There were compounds that were more British influenced. There were compounds that were more American influenced. There were schools that were British and schools that were American and schools that were Pakistani and Indian. And so if you spoke to someone who just lived a little way away from me, but they lived outside of a compound and went to a Pakistani school, their accent would be fairly Pakistani.
Gotcha.
We don't actually get Saudi accents because the expats there are not really able to mingle with the locals.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because life is so segregated.
Yeah,
so
and
you might have
that.
A British accent, you might have an American accent, or you might have a Pakistani or Indian or whatever else accent.
Gotcha.
Depending on what your schooling was.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I'd heard that, but that just seems impossible for me to believe. But yeah, I guess maybe because in the West we're so highly integrated in all of our things that living in a compound and not acquiring an accent from any area just seems like such a foreign concept. But okay, interesting.
Yeah, I know. Whenever I tell people, like, especially when I was brand new here, or I was on the plane here, I was sitting next to a woman, and I was a teenager, and my parents were a few rows up. And she's like, oh, where are you from? I'm like, Saudi Arabia. And I had like a high school like literature book that I was reading. She's like, wow, you're reading in English. That's amazing. And I'm like, yeah,
Yikes.
like I can speak English. Like,
Yeah.
And she kept going on like about explaining like slang terms. So like, oh, that's cool. That doesn't mean it's cold, okay? Like, and I'm like, yeah, I know what cool means. Like,
yeah.
It's funny. I still get people telling me, wow, your English is amazing.
Was she an older person?
Yeah, she was.
This is a term that I use a lot, that a lot of people on the left get mad at me, but I feel like, and again, like, just because I try to be so precise, I notice that there are a lot of, like, I call it old person racism, where I don't think they genuinely, like, they're probably not, like, or maybe they do harbor some internal, like, but, like, the way that it manifests is in such a, it's like in a way that's, like, really hard to call out. Like, for, like, one example I give, like, I had a grandma and she would always refer to black people as colored folk, but she would never say anything like that she hates black people, but she would just say these things that made me wonder sometimes, like, okay.
Look, she was raised in a different time. Like, I would not hold your grandma or my great grandma to the same sort of like progressive standards as I would someone my age. Mm-hmm. It's just strange to do that, I think. And I don't know, is that a form of relativism? I don't
maybe.
I don't know. But I just, maybe I have lower standards for older people, but I just don't think that they have the same background, the same socialization, the same upbringing, the same education. It's different. Like, even older Pakistani people say so many racist things. It's like, yeah, we definitely try to call it out like the young people, but it's so ingrained. These changes happen slowly. I think the generations that come after are going to do better and then better and then better. Some things are definitely generational. You know that they're not like racist, like they hate people of different colors, just like their language or, you know, their terminology has not updated.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And similarly, we have so many racial caricatures in like poorer countries like Pakistan and even Mexico. I was talking to someone on Twitter about this, is like, you know, how we are very conscious about not racially caricaturing people over here in the West, right? Mm-hmm. But in countries that don't have a lot of education or affluence, you'll see a lot of shop signs with these racist caricatures of their own race.
Sure.
It's something that I think comes with having the luxury and privilege to worry about these things.
Yeah, there's a lot of awareness. It's very, very, very hard, especially depending on who you are, right? Like for me, like as a white straight dude, like I have to be very hyper aware to be perceptive of things that I would never think about if I wasn't like, you know, really thinking about it. Mm-hmm. A lot of that have been somewhat relevant recently, things like even things like how black women wear their hair is something that I would have never thought about, you know, a few years ago, that I paid a little bit more attention to in terms of like, you know, what are you allowed to wear, what seems professional, what's not, you know, is there something built into this that maybe is actually kind of shitty, like, yeah.
Yeah, these conversations, like I don't think that in Pakistan there's a lot of that going on yet. People are still struggling for basic human rights. Once we get those, then we'll progress to like the smaller conversations. Like I think there's a lot of like Sunni privilege, for example, in Pakistan that people don't acknowledge or understand. Like me as a non-religious person, when I was working there for the couple of years that I worked there, there was so much pressure and strangeness around the time of Ramadan, right? Like I didn't fast, and like everybody was like, they practically gasped when I pulled my sandwich out, you know, like at lunchtime. Or they'll like force the religious greetings upon you, you know, like assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and you're like, well, hello, hi. You know, it's like those are like little aggressions that get to me. And I guess they're very SJW if you look at that in a Western context. But I think that the anti-SJWs would be fully behind calling out Muslim microaggressions.
Yeah.
I don't know if that made any sense.
No, yeah, I agree. Or maybe even like if white people acted the same way that Muslims do in some ways, they would be more keen on calling it out. Right? Yeah. But again, going by what we said earlier, like I can understand the hesitancy to do it. I really don't criticize Islam that much on my stream, even though I probably hate every aspect of it, the same that I would with Christianity. But
it's
just because
you're a regressive leftist, right?
Yeah, maybe. Just because I know that if I were to do it, if I were to do it often, I know the type of crowd I would get, and I would have to give a million caveats to everything I say. Yeah.
You have to actively fight off that crowd. If you're an atheist, you have to actively resist. Otherwise, your audience is filled. Like, trust me, as I've recognized that as an ex-Muslim, I was just doing my thing and talking about the thing that I was familiar with, and I sort of got this crowd that I was not happy with. I was like, what the hell? Who are these people that follow me and support me? Mm-hmm. Someone would support me on Patreon and be like, I'm supporting you right now, but I'm hoping that you'll, recognize that being against anti-Muslim bigotry is a really foolish thing. And I'm like, what? No, thank you. I don't want your support.
Something that you brought up earlier is like very funny to me. Growing up in the United States, growing up Catholic, when I was 15, 16, I started to make my transition or whatever to atheism. It's very funny because atheism, not even 15 years ago, maybe not even 10 years ago, was so anti-Christianity. Like we had people like Penn Jillette and Dawkins and like all these guys that were very, very, very kind of like anti-Christianity. And it seems like the newer atheists, you get people like I don't want to be too mean on here, but people like Sam Harris, people like Peterson who are...
Peterson isn't an atheist.
Yeah, Peterson might not be. Yeah, no, Peterson might not be, but like there are a lot of, I think, atheists that follow him, but Sam Harris is an atheist. Yes, I'm almost positive.
Is he? I don't know. No,
I'm almost positive.
Joking.
But
yes,
he constantly praises like Judeo-Christian values and everything, which is so strange to me that like the new atheist community
and also Douglas Murray, right? Like
I'm not as familiar with Murray.
He's a British commentator, and he like wrote articles about like criticizing Dawkins for criticizing Christianity too much. And he's just and he's very anti-immigrant, and so a lot of people embrace him, and he's very, very specifically anti-Islam. But when it comes to Christianity, he's like, we should concede to people that religion has some good things that come with it, and it's like, I
don't know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hey, listen, I had a lot of fun talking.
Same. It was a pleasure.
If you ever see anything of mine that you think I'm super wrong about or whatever, if you ever shoot me a message, I'd love to talk again, and I'll keep in touch.
Cool. Are you going to come back on Twitter? Or?
I actually think I'm permanently suspended from Twitter.
That's fun.
I got spam reported by all the people that I was debating against. Their whole fan base rose up against me and struck me down. The free speech lovers. So.
Free speech lovers, yeah. Funny how that works. Well, maybe you should make a new account.
No, I'm actually like permanently banned. Like every new account that I make gets resuspended instantly.
Oh shit! Really?
Yeah, it's actually really brutal.
Oh no! Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, if you have any friends at Twitter that work in the support, pass them my way and I'll chat with them.
I wish. Yeah, no, I don't.
Yeah. Right.
I've had that happen as well. So yeah, on Facebook and YouTube.
Damn.
Yeah. All right. Well, take care. Thanks for having me on.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for having the conversation. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye. I don't think Harris himself is like pro-Christianity. It's just that when I hear him criticize Islam, it seems like he has this very strange... I don't know. I have to look into it more. It seems like he has this kind of like implicit approval of like Judeo-Christian values. It's just kind of strange to me sometimes. I'm not sure. Well, I guess he calls them Western values, so maybe he separates that. Maybe what I interpret as a dog whistle isn't necessarily a dog whistle. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm bringing on a crazy guy because we haven't had a crazy guy on in a long time. Stefan Molyneux is a huge Christian supporter, even though he's an atheist like you. Yeah, I can't engage with Stefan as much, so like listening to his videos, makes me want to kill myself. Harris literally hates Trump. I never said that Harris likes Trump. Sam Harris absolutely hates Trump. I don't think he's been wishy-washy on that at all.